But when people go into commercial conversions, they might start off with one development, but then they'll soon and gradually grow into doing 3, 4, 5, depending on how quickly they grow at the same time. If they are doing 2 or more, I usually recommend that they have separate SPVs. Now they can have a holding company structure. If people are, let's say, going to have 2 different strategies, and one's simple plain vanilla buy-to-let and the other one is, let's say, commercial conversions, but they intend to sell the units once they've been converted, then generally speaking my recommendation would be to have possibly 2 different structures. So your buy-to-let business, you can have that in a single SPV or just a limited companies, is the same thing, and you just keep buying your assets in that limited company, and then with your commercial conversions have them in a separate limited company. And what you'll usually find is when people go into commercial conversions, they might start off with one development, but then they'll soon and gradually grow into doing 3, 4, 5, depending on how quickly they grow at the same time. If they are doing 2 or more, I usually recommend that they have separate SPVs. Now they can have a holding company structure. So at the top they've got company A, which is the holding company that holds shares in all the different SPVs, and there's lots of different reasons and tax benefits and advantages for doing that. But they keep it part of one particular structure. I should add at this point is, if you have a holding company structure, it does make it harder to get funding, and certain banks don't like it. So that's the kind of simple structure. Now let's say somebody becomes a bit more sophisticated and says, I'm also looking to do serviced accommodation. So my advice to them would be to explore all the different structures. So sometimes I find certain people are fixated on only ever having everything in their own name. There are people like that. There are certain people who are fixated on only ever having a limited company structure. And I think people should explore different structures. So if I may, Rupert, I'll share the example that I shared earlier about serviced accommodation. Let's say Rachel's on this call, and she and I were talking a few weeks ago, so I hope she won't mind me picking her as the example. Thank you, Rachel. So let's say Rachel decides she wants to go into serviced accommodation, and she's pretty sure that she's going to grow and scale that particular business. So, and she thinks she's going to make, let's say, in her first year, £100,000 worth of profit, and she's going to have an ample amount or a sizable amount of capital allowances, both on purchase of a commercial property which she's going to convert, and then on the refurb amount too. Now let's say those capital allowances are £100,000. If she were to run that business through a limited company, she's made £100,000 profit in the first year. She's written off £100,000 by accelerating her allowances, so she's got no corporation tax to pay. However, Rachel now has £100,000 stuck in her limited company, and Rachel's saying, well, Shaz, I've got a mortgage to pay, I've got kids to feed, I need to go on a holiday, I want to buy a new car, so I'd like to take out £75,000 of that of the funds sat in the limited company account. Well, Rachel can do that, and if she has she doesn't have a director's loan account whereby the company owes her money, she'll have to pay income tax after using her personal allowance and her £2,000 dividend allowance. She'll have to pay income tax on the majority of the £75,000. Now if Rachel were to run that business through, let's say, a limited liability partnership, she'd write off the £100,000 capital allowances against her profits. She's now got that 100 grand sat in her bank account. she can do what she likes with that Rupert, because there's no further tax to pay, because an LLP is transparent for tax purposes. So that means the individual partners are liable to pay the tax. But because Rachel's used her capital allowances to write off the profit, there is no tax to pay. So that £100,000 now becomes available to her without paying any further tax. So if you run this over a number of years, and every year, let's say Rachel buys an additional commercial property which she converts to capital allowances, gets 2 lots of capital allowances, you can imagine after year 4, 5, 6, 7 and beyond, she'll have a sizable amount of capital allowances that she's built up, some that she's used in year, others she's carrying forward, so that 18%, if they all qualify for the 18% general pool, number gets bigger just because the value of the capital allowances gets bigger. So Rachel is probably not going to pay tax for quite a few years. Then she might get to a stage where she says, I'm not paying any tax, I'm using up most of my capital allowances, why don't I set up a SAS and start pushing some of my funds in there and reducing my tax exposure, but not using up all of my capital allowances. So now she starts building up her SAS as well. That's going to help her to pay less tax, or as it's going to mitigate her inheritance tax, and all the funds and income that the SAS generates, there's no tax to pay on that. So now Rachel's building up, let's say, a pot in her SAS, which the lifetime limit I think is 1,017,000. I can never always keep up with the exact number, but it is just over £1 million. But she already has her limited company where she does title splits, for example, so that earns her some income. She doesn't take any of that income out, so she pays no income tax, but she's running her serviced accommodation unit through an LLP using capital allowances and paying no income tax whatsoever, but gets her hands on, let's say, £75,000 worth of profits every single year, but she's paid no income tax whatsoever.